John, you wrote a wonderful book called Mind Body Problems. And I remember when I read it, I thought this is such a creative way to approach the infamous mind body problem. So, my first question for you is, what is your interpretation of the mind body problem? And how did that inspire you to write the book?
Yeah, good question. My my way of looking at the mind body problem has evolved a lot over the decades. Um, I first started writing about it when I was writing about consciousness in the early 90s. Consciousness, the hard problem. I was actually at a talk by David Chalmers in the early 1990s at this big conference in Tucson, Arizona, where he used the phrase "the hard problem" for the first time. And there weren't many people in the audience. Chalmers was just this obscure, long-haired philosopher from Australia. But I remember the audience, it was early morning and people were kind of sleepy, but people perked up at that phrase, the hard consciousness. I mean, the hard problem. And I wrote it down in my notebook. I reported on this talk and other things that happened at this meeting for Scientific American. So my initial idea of the mind-body problem was, how does the brain generate conscious states? These first-person states that I and you presumably also are having right now. So I saw the mind-body problem in pretty narrow terms. And this is the way it had been defined by Francis Crick, this guy named Christoph Koch, who was Crick's collaborator in trying to solve the mind-body problem. Over time, my view of the mind-body problem became much more expansive. And now I think of it as the question of what we are as humans. And that encompasses personal identity. What am I? What kind of human being am I? It encompasses the idea of collective identity. What are humans in general? What have we always been? What will we be in the future? I think it encompasses moral questions, because if we're talking about what we are, we also, at least implicitly, are always talking about what we should be, what constitutes a good person, what constitutes a good life. And we're also talking about what we can be. And that's where science comes in. To what extent can we alter what we are through these different technologies, brain implants, genetic engineering, drugs, those sorts of things. So now the mind-body problem is all these different interconnected questions that come down to the big primordial question, what are we really?
Sorry, John, the connection just stopped for a second there. Are you back?
Yes. Yeah, I saw you. You just froze. You're in South Africa, right?
No, so that's my fault because I just switched over to another internet connection.
Oh,
okay. Sorry about that. Continue.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, so, I am in South Africa, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So my point was that the mind-body problem I see now as including the hard problem of consciousness, but all these other sorts of questions too about personal identity, about collective identity, about how we should live our lives. So it includes these sorts of moral and even political questions. And it also includes questions about what we can be. To what extent can we alter ourselves with technology, with brain implants and genetic engineering and these sorts of things.
I remember when I spoke to Nicholas Humphrey, he was the one who told me about your book, because I had not seen it at the time, and when I read it, I found this approach very fascinating, because essentially what you're talking about right now, how this incorporates so many different ideas, personal identity, moral responsibility. I mean, you approached it by looking at the philosophers or scientists from their own journeys and their personal journeys moving forward. So talk to me about that process. What inspired them?
Well, I gradually began to arrive at this idea that I began questioning the idea that there was a solution to the mind-body problem, either as narrowly defined as the hard problem of consciousness, or this more expansive idea of the mind-body problem, answering the question of what we really are. How can it possibly be that one answer can suffice for all of us? Now, you can look at human history in a way as the struggle to find one answer to this question of what we really are. All religions purport to answer that question. You've got non-religious ideologies like Marxism that also is really kind of a response to the mind-body problem. Marx is saying this is what we are. We're these economic agents, and we inhabit different classes and all this sort of stuff. And this is how we should live our lives. We should reform ourselves in these various ways that Marx spelled out. Then you've got these other scientific theories, like eugenics, that also is this implicit answer to the mind-body problem. Lots of theories, when you get closer to the present, saying that we're a bunch of algorithms, we're a collection of genes. Richard Dawkins, the famous biologist, defined us as just a cluster of selfish genes trying to get into the next generation. That's an interesting idea. We're just a bunch of neurotransmitters rattling around in our skulls. So the potential answers to the mind-body problem have proliferated enormously, and that especially makes me think that no answer can suffice, especially since science keeps evolving, philosophy keeps evolving, and that means that there will be answers proposed to this question 10, 20, 50 years from now that nobody even anticipated. Also, each individual is going to answer the mind-body problem at different times in his or her life in different ways. And I personally, and I assume this happens with you too, I keep changing my mind about what I really am and what I should be and what I want out of life. So to dramatize this idea, which at first was very kind of blurry in my head, I decided to write a book about mind-body scholars coming from very different philosophical or scientific perspectives, who actually had struggled with the mind-body problem in a really personal way. They weren't sure about their own sexual identity. They struggled with profound depression. I interviewed this one philosopher who had a brain tumor that dramatically changed his personality. People struggling with severe grief, and as a result, changing their ideas about who they really are and about what humans collectively should be. So that was my goal in writing the book, was to dramatize this suddenly pluralistic view I had of the mind-body problem.
I think you're right, because not only do I change my mind in general, but from starting this podcast, I mean, obviously I call it Mind-Body Solution, paying homage to the problem, but I don't necessarily believe we'll find one. And my own perspective on the problem in itself has changed dramatically since starting the podcast. I mean, I came in with certain biases and views, and I've noticed it just change the more someone's able to provide me coherent counter arguments to whatever I believe. And I find that very fascinating, because it shows just how difficult this problem actually is.
And I mean, I understand why some people want to have the answer. Life is puzzling, it's agonizing, it can be very, very difficult. And we want to think that there is a solution out there. We get it, and we realize, this is how I should live my life. This is how we should all live our lives. And there are lots of people out there saying that they have discovered the answer, and they're telling us we should accept the same answer as they do. But that's such a cramped, narrow way of looking at life. It's so much more exhilarating to me, and also more of a reflection of what reality actually is, to be open-minded and to say, well, here's an interesting idea. I'm going to explore this for a little while, but oh, look, over there's an interesting idea too. This is something that happens when a person like you just talks to other people and you read books, and you suddenly see the whole issue in a different light. That's a wonderful thing, but it just means you have to give up this idea of reaching a final answer. You have to give up the idea that there can be certainty when we're trying to figure out who we really are.
Yeah, I spoke to a philosopher named Francois. He's French. He's Camera. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, his surname, but anyway, he's a strong defendant of illusionism. And I told him how my views shifted over time, and even though sometimes when I do chat to certain people, I do disagree with the view fundamentally, but I'm able to sort of now, at this time in my life and this point in my life, I'm able to create these almost virtual realities. And that's what he said I'm doing. He's basically, I'm creating this virtual reality, going with the narrative and just having the conversation. And I believe that's been so vital to making this work, because that way I'm open-minded to all the possibilities while still remaining while still maintaining a reasonable amount of skepticism. Do you think that's a good way, as you, from writing as a science journalist, someone who very much attacks a lot of science, from a skeptical manner, not necessarily anti-science? Well, we'll chat about that in more detail, but do you think that's a great way to maintain an open mind?
Yeah. So I have this old friend. He used to teach history of science at my school. His name is Jim McClellan. He retired a few years ago, but we're still constantly in touch. And he's an honest to God postmodernist. So he thinks whenever you talk about truth or knowledge, you should put those terms in scare quotes. He says that all our theories, our best scientific knowledge, is really just a bunch of stories. And some stories are better than others, but you should never mistake any story for the final word on what's out there or what's in here. And I completely reject postmodernism as it applies to, I don't know, mapping out the universe. I think we have discovered lots of things that are true about the universe, from the existence of subatomic particles like electrons and protons to elements, galaxies out there beyond the Milky Way. Those aren't stories. Those are real things about the universe. But when it comes to ourselves, when it comes to understanding what we are, I think postmodernism is absolutely appropriate. I think we should see neuroscientific or evolutionary or computer science models of the human mind as stories that can do things for us, that can help us see ourselves in ways that are useful, that might help us come up with better treatments for mental illness, that might be consoling to us, that help us deal with death and the ephemerality of life, but that are always replaceable by better stories or just by different stories in the future.
It's almost like a useful analogy. The same way religion was useful to the people at the time, and it was thought to be the truth for those people at the time. It was very useful. I mean, you can still see a lot of usage within it, and the same thing applies for Newtonian physics when he came across telling people that this is how the motion of bodies work. And then Einstein comes and changes that along, but you realize that it's still very useful.
Yeah, and usefulness can be defined in lots of different ways. So there are some theories that have enormous practical consequences. So like plain old Newtonian mechanics is enough to land a spaceship on the moon, which is pretty impressive. Nuclear physics allowed us to build hydrogen bombs, which have altered history in ways that are horrible, but still, that's an impressive sign that those theories of subatomic matter and energy are onto something, that they're pretty close to grasping the actual truth. But there are these less tangible ways of saying that a theory works. For example, I'm interested in theories that say consciousness is the basis of reality instead of matter. I mean, there's this ancient debate about the primacy of matter versus mind, and I haven't made up my mind, which is right. Maybe we could talk about that. But the idea that everything is consciousness, and that the consciousness that you and I both possess right now, in some sense, it's never ending. It's just going to merge in with some kind of greater collective consciousness when we're gone. I find that very consoling. I don't necessarily believe it, but I like to think about it now and then when I'm feeling a little fragile and mortal. So that is another way in which a theory can be very powerful and very effective.
I was going to ask you about that. At this point in your life, after chatting to all these philosophers and scientists, where's your head at? What is consciousness to you? What do you believe it really is? Is there a group you fall into at this point? Do you consider yourself a panpsychist in that regard, or idealist? Or where are you?
You said before, I'm a skeptic. I love ideas. I became a science journalist because I love watching science do its thing and come up with these different ideas about what's going on in the world. And I've been reporting on mind-body theories of consciousness for decades now. And I'll be honest, the more I do it, and I right up to the present, I've been commenting on some developments in consciousness studies just recently, just over the last couple of months. The more I do this, the more I think nobody really knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
The more mysterious the problem becomes, the more mysterious this experience I'm having right now of being this conscious thing becomes absolutely baffling to me. I think that when we look straight at our own existence, including the fact that we're conscious, if we really saw it clearly, we should be absolutely dumbfounded all the time. And we should realize that every single theory, no matter how powerful, no matter how seemingly effective, no matter the practical consequences that it has, is absolutely inadequate. And that includes panpsychism and idealism and materialism. I don't even think we have the right language yet to solve these problems, to even talk about them in a coherent way. I think this is almost like the equivalent of physics in the 14th century, where you look back at how people were talking about matter and things moving around in space, and you think, wow, they were just so deluded. They really didn't know. I mean, they're making an honest effort, but they really don't know what the hell they're talking about. I think in the future, we're going to look back on this period with integrated information theory and the global workspace theory and all these different theories of mind. And we're going to go, oh my God, those people actually believed in that shit back then.
I mean, I saw you wrote that paper on the brouhaha of the whole IIT dilemma. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Do you want to give some context
to
the listeners and viewers? Maybe you can also do that.
Yeah. So integrated information theory is this very serious attempt to solve the hard problem of consciousness. It's about 20 years old. It was introduced by this guy named Giulio Tononi, who's got a fancy pedigree. He was a graduate student under this guy named Gerald Edelman, a Nobel Prize winner who also had very ambitious ideas about solving the hard problem of consciousness. So Tononi is a really serious guy.
Yeah.
And And he proposed this mathematical theory of, and the fact that it's mathematical impresses a lot of people, but it's a mathematical theory of consciousness that says consciousness arises out of any system that has parts that interact in this certain way that you can mathematically define. The interconnection of the components is sometimes called the synergy of the system. The mathematical quantity is called phi, and there's this little Greek symbol for that. It's really impenetrable. If you read the initial papers, it's extremely dense. I went to a workshop in 2015 because I was trying to understand it. The main reason I took it seriously was not only because Tononi had proposed it, but because Christoph Koch, who I mentioned before, one of the world's leading neuroscientists, embraced it about, 15 years ago or so, and said, yeah, this is it, man. This is the best theory of consciousness we've got. So these very serious people were espousing this theory. They got lots of other folks, graduate students, postdocs, other theorists to jump on the bandwagon. And the New York Times wrote big stories about it. I wrote about it for Scientific American. A lot of people were saying, I was skeptical of my take from the beginning, but a lot of people were saying, yeah, man, this is it. Maybe this is, at least if it's not the final theory of consciousness, it's a stepping stone. But the theory was ridiculous from the start. It basically says what Christoph Koch told me was that the synergy that's defined by the theory can occur in a single proton, which consists of three interacting quarks that are, you can think of them as exchanging information. So there's a little spark of consciousness in a single proton. That means that consciousness is everywhere. So that's panpsychism. I went to this workshop at NYU on integrated information theory, as I mentioned, in 2015. And there was actually a debate at one point over whether dark energy is conscious. Whether integrated information theory implies that. There was this brilliant computer scientist named Scott Aronson who was at the meeting, and mainly the meeting was sort of cheerleading for this theory. Scott Aronson just drove a stake through the theory's heart by pointing out that according to the mathematical definition of the theory, a CD player should be more conscious than a human being. So he was just pointing out all these absurd conclusions of the theory, but it's persisted, and because it's exciting and it's ambitious and it's mathematical and all that, but there are some people who've always been skeptical, not just as science journalists like me, but some other serious theorists, scientists, and philosophers. And just recently, I guess it was last month, a bunch of them got together. More than 100 people signed this letter, and this is including some real big shots, like Daniel Dennett and Joe Ledoux, who's a neuroscientist at NYU, and they said, we're just sick of, basically, I'm paraphrasing, we're sick of all the attention this theory has been getting because this theory is pseudoscience. And so I wrote a piece about that for my blog, and because I thought it was really funny. And my reaction was kind of, yeah, of course it's pseudoscience. All theories of consciousness at this point are pseudoscience, in that none of them is rigorously enough defined so that they can be falsified. So that was my column. Basically, I'm saying, yeah, integrated information theory, pseudoscience. But then here, look at some of these other theories that are also pseudoscience. And then I went on to say that they're theories in physics, and I just started shooting wildly in all directions, pointing out that science is riddled with pseudoscience. If you really want to be mean about it, So why single out integrated information theory?
Mm.
So anyway, yeah, that's the backstory of that controversy.
I think it's amazing how much controversy that's initiated, because it was such a big topic of conversation that some neuroscientists and philosophers who came out, made a statement, even started retracting their statements because it was so intense. I mean, that's probably a great thing in the sense that finally consciousness research, at least, is getting the attention it deserves. But then it also reminds people of the fact that there was a time where this happened, and it keeps going through these sort of influxes of like, people are interested, people lose interest. People are interested, people lose interest. Do you see that as a pattern lately, or do you think it's finally reached the recognition phase in reality that it deserves?
I think
Or is it
I
like
have this.
and it's not even that important, and we should focus on more important science?
Well, or just more important things out there in the world.
Yeah.
I think I've got sort of a jaded view. You know, I've been writing about science for 40 years now, and I've seen a lot of fads come and go. I've seen these boom bust cycles and all sorts of different fields, and it makes me I'm what I try to guard against is becoming so jaded that any new idea that comes up, I go, that's bullshit. Come on, nobody's going to believe that, because sometimes new ideas do come along that are really exciting, and some of those ideas might be kind of bullshitty. They might be pseudoscientific in one sense, and still really exciting. Still, they're interesting, and they give you a new way of looking at the world. I think that's true of integrated information theory. This theory actually has made me think really hard, just trying to figure out why it's wrong, why it's not really a serious theory. Makes me think about the hard problem in new ways and focus on it more intently. And this happens throughout science. So in the book that my first book, which is the book that I'm best known for, In the End of Science, I coined this term ironic science to describe science that is so speculative that it can never be confirmed. You can never really get evidence that it's true. And as an example of that, I cited string theory, superstring theory, which is this unified theory of matter and energy that's been kicking around for more than 40 years now, was really popular. Now it's kind of declining. The problem with it from the start was that it predicts things that can't be accessed by any experiment. But what an amazing theory it is. So from the start, I thought, God, I don't see this going anywhere. But holy cow, little strings wriggling in 11 dimensions give rise to our four-dimensional space-time. That's really cool. The same way with multiverse theories, which also are an implication of string theory and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Other universes, in addition to our own, that never can be accessed experimentally. Come on. But wow, what an idea. It's mind-blowing at the same time as I'm like pointing out all the flaws with it. So I've always had this ambivalence about I don't know what you might call pseudoscience and kind of bullshit science, ironic science, to use the term that I coined. But in a way, some of that science is the most fun to write about because it's wild, it's ambitious, it's imaginative. It's scientists going beyond the bounds of what's respectable and making up some really crazy shit and saying, maybe the world is this way. And you go, yeah, well, probably not, but yeah, that's really cool.
Do you think that people often misinterpret your skepticism as not anti-scientism, but almost a version of, I wouldn't even say pseudoscience, but I'm sure you get what I'm trying to say. But people do put you in this category. That, do you think you deserve that?
Yeah, listen. I've taken a lot of heat And I don't really, it doesn't bother me that much because I'm out there, I'm out there taking shots at other people's ideas. I've said some really mean things about different scientists and about different theories over the years. I can be very mocking and dismissive, and I'll use all my rhetorical tricks to try to puncture different theories. And so people accuse me of being anti-science or pseudo-scientific, or say, a lot of people just say, who listens to John Horgan? He's just a science writer. He only has a degree in literature and journalism. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And, I'll go, yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, you just like, I just look at my track record. I think I've got a pretty good track record in saying that certain theories are dead ends and are not going to go anywhere. Finally, people are starting to accept that when it comes to string theory and multiverse theories and things like that. So I'm pretty thick-skinned. What makes me happy is that people still, serious philosophers and scientists still want to talk to me. They still want to persuade me that their theory is, yeah, Horgan, you've like been trashing everything in this field for decades now, but I've got a theory that I think you're really going to like. It's really cool. And I'm like, okay, bring it on, man. Let me check this out. Let me see what you got.
Yeah, almost
and,
like, in that sense, you're almost like the girl who's playing hard to get for them. They're still trying to win you over there. They've got this deep and psychological urge to please you at this point.
I think that's part of it. But the fact is, the best part of this job is feeling like I'm part of this conversation that goes back actually thousands of years about what is this? Like, what's going on here? What am I? What are you? What is existence? And there are all these smart people out there trying to figure it out. People who know a lot more than I do, and then I'm listening to what they have to say, and I have reactions to it. And some of them say, "Oh, shut up! Nobody cares what you think." And others say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I think you might have a point there." But what's cool for me is that I am part of this conversation, and that I picked the right job. Science journalism turned out to be I'm kind of a misfit, but science journalism turned out to be the perfect career for me.
I mean, in that regard, I completely empathize with you, because starting this podcast, I've been able to chat to some of my heroes. I mean, it's been such an amazing journey for me. And even though I feel like I'm not bringing much to the table, it's still so great to be in such great company. I mean, you guys have done so much. You've written so much about this. So even just chatting to you guys, it's quite surreal sometimes.
Yeah, and to me, I described before how I think if you see reality clearly, you're like, what the hell? Your eyes are bugging out. Your mouth is dropping open. You're just in a state of awe and wonderment and confusion. And it's kind of a mystical state. This happens to me when I'm tripping too. And talking to other people about their theories often puts me in that state. Swapping ideas with Christoph Koch about integrated information theory and the hard problem and his dark energy conscious, and I'm like, yeah, man, everything is so goddamn weird. That's one of the joys of this whole process of science journalism.
Yeah, I mean, the universe in itself, the story of the universe is quite trippy. When you actually try and understand it, it's one of those things where I often tell people, you don't need religion to have a truly awe-inspiring religious experience with science. You can just trying to understand the universe. Well, not even just with science, but I mean with understanding the universe. It's quite trippy.
One thing that's a little distressing to me is I teach college. I teach at an engineering school. I live in Hoboken, and I teach at a school called Stevens Institute of Technology. I teach freshman humanities classes. I teach a seminar in science writing. I teach a class on science and war. I'm interested in war, and I wrote a book about that. And I sometimes try to get my students to care about things I care about. And so I might say, maybe I saw some images from the James Webb Telescope, and I'm like, yeah, wow, those pictures of those galaxies way back in time are messing up the cosmologists. They don't know what to make of these galaxies. It seems to have formed before the Big Bang Theory says they should have formed. And I kind of looking at my students, and some look interested, and most of them are just kind of gone. And I say, I did this just like within the last couple of weeks. I say, who cares about where the universe came from? And they're all kind of looking at each other, and maybe a couple of hands go up. They don't really care about this stuff.
Yeah.
Are you crazy? How could you not care about that? Are you puzzled by it? Yeah. And then I try to tell them about what we know about the universe, and how one of the most amazing discoveries of all time, because it's comprehensible, is the idea that the universe is expanding, and probably had this beginning about, we've calculated it to be about 14 billion years ago. Why do we believe that? So I go through the redshift data and the abundances of elements, and the cosmic afterglow, microwave afterglow of the universe, and I tell them all that. And some of them are like, yeah, that is kind of cool. So that's another thing I try to do in my own writing, not only to just kind of dump on theories that I think are a little overly ambitious, aren't that well supported, but to talk about what we do know and what is really well supported, like the basic Big Bang Theory. And I present the evidence. I just remind people of how well supported that is, and try to get them to realize how incredible that is. The universe had a beginning. Wow, think of the implications of that. The Big Bang Theory was rejected for a long time by a lot of physicists, astronomers, scientists in general, because it was seen as being too religious. It had too much in common with creation stories coming from the Bible and other sacred texts. But hey, guess what? The Big Bang Theory seems real. This is one area where I don't. My old friend Jim McClellan, the postmodernist, he thinks that the Big Bang Theory is just another story. I just wrote a piece recently saying the Big Bang Theory is true. Deal with it, because the evidence for it is overwhelming.
I think that's also one of my favorite stories. I remember the first time going through that, figuring out. I mean, the guys. I think it was birds. They thought birds were making a noise, and they're trying to eliminate the sound. And then slowly Hubble comes in and shows you that the universe. It's one of those awe-inspiring stories. It's kind of like this. It's such a logical jump to think, okay, if it's moving this way, let's just go backward and sort of figure out what would happen. I mean, that's such a good thing to think about. Do you think it's like things where it's incredible? It's one of those things. It's so obvious, and yet it's so epic at the same time.
Yeah, and well, another thing that's amazing about the whole story of the Big Bang is that if you go back just like 100 years ago, I mean, that's a blink of an eye. Most astronomers, physicists, people who thought about the structure of the universe at all, just assume that the universe consists of the Milky Way, all these stars that we can see at night. We're in this big our sun is in this big swirl of stars. There were these little fuzzy patches in the sky that some people, going back to Immanuel Kant, the great Austrian philosopher, thought might be other island universes like the Milky Way, but we couldn't be sure until then telescopes in the 1920s got big enough so that they could look at those little tiny fuzzy patches and see individual stars in them. And they realized those are other galaxies like the Milky Way, really far away. So even before we discovered the redshift, which indicated the expansion, all of a sudden the universe became exponentially bigger. The boundaries of our world just flew out. So that just 100 years
That's not that
ago.
long ago,
It's
exactly. And I
yeah,
think the story behind, I remember it was, I think Hubble just decided to leave the telescope placed in that spot. It wasn't really an active decision. It was more one of those things. That's where the ultra deep field comes from. It was more just one of those random things where you're like, let's just leave it there and collect as much photons as possible. And then you get blown away with this information that literally changes everything you know.
yeah, the redshift data. And then another very serendipitous discovery that really helped. It convinced most people that the Big Bang is real, happened right here in northern New Jersey, just down the road from my school at Bell Laboratories. You had a bunch of guys, radio engineers, who were working on a microwave communication system for the telephone network and kept getting this weird buzzing.
Yes.
And in their transmissions, and they thought that it might be that birds had pooped on
Yes,
their
that was what I was
receiver.
mentioning earlier. The birds, they thought it was birds pooping and stuff.
Yeah.
Epic story.
So then they realized, and then one of them remembered, hey, I read this paper that said that the Big Bang should have left a residual afterglow in the form of microwaves that are almost exactly what we're observing here. Could it be that? And of course it was that. And these guys who weren't even looking for it won a Nobel Prize for discovering the afterglow of the Big Bang.
Just trying to eliminate a sound. Can you imagine the scientific and philosophical implications that move from there? It's such a shift in thought, because I often tell people, can you imagine living in a universe where, well, in what was a galaxy, where suddenly it's just opened up to almost an infinite reality? That's such a weird thing to go through. Do you think that's currently happening? Because I saw a tweet today, I think it was Brian Keating. It could have just been clickbait, but because now, as you mentioned, they are starting to question whether it does expand further than 13.8 billion light years. Do you think this is, I haven't followed the data enough. What are your thoughts there?
So I've been tracking cosmology, this study of the whole universe, for decades now. And it's, the field is in a funny situation because in a sense, they're really proud of having a basic framework for understanding the universe. It's the basic Big Bang expanding universe model, which we've just been talking about. But the Big Bang is kind of like the theory of evolution by natural selection. There are always these outstanding questions. So for evolution, well, how exactly do species form, and how do they diverge from each other? For the Big Bang cosmology, it's how do galaxies form? How did they form? When did they form after the initial Big Bang? And there are lots of other questions like that, sort of detailed questions about how we got from this supposed creation event to where we are today. And there are all these additions to the Big Bang theory to try to solve some of these questions involving dark matter, dark energy, something called inflation, which is a theory of enormous cosmic expansion that happened right after the initial Big Bang that would solve some of the observational problems we have. And a lot of these theories sort of come and go. I've seen them come and go. And then when there are problems with some of these additional theories, people say, oh, the Big Bang is in trouble. In the same way that sometimes, I don't know, epigenetics or something in biology leads people to say, oh, Darwin was wrong. No, Darwin wasn't wrong. The theory of evolution by natural selection is rock solid.
Oh.
And the Big Bang, the idea that the universe had a beginning and is still expanding to this day, that is rock solid. But there are all these other questions that we've tried to solve with additional theories, and those come and go and lead cosmologists to say, oh, we need a new paradigm. Everything is in peril now, and we're going to have a revolution. And they want that to happen because it's getting a little boring in cosmology nowadays.
Yeah, no, for sure. I spoke to Lawrence Krauss, it was about a week or two ago, and we were discussing whether science needs philosophy. And I know you've addressed this quite a lot, including the topic of him discussing it. What are your thoughts on that? Because he firmly believes science is the ultimate truth. So anything beyond scientific truth or empirical evidence is not possible from his perspective.
Yeah, I don't know. I have sort of, let me see, what can I say about old Lawrence Krauss?
I'm chatting to you, so maybe I can ask a question for you.
Yeah, he's a funny person because he does a lot of philosophy in his writing. He's just not very good at it. He's what I call a naive philosopher. So he wrote a book, I can't remember the title, that's basically saying we've solved the mystery of why the universe exists at all.
Universe
why there's something
from nothing.
Yeah, universe from nothing. And he made disparaging comments about philosophy in that book. Even though there are lots of philosophical assumptions in the book. So he's basically saying that, and this is an old idea, it certainly wasn't something that he came up with, that the universe might have started with some kind of quantum fluctuation in a cosmic void. And this is the inflation theory, which I mentioned earlier, is kind of that general idea that quantum mechanics says that there's no such thing as a true vacuum. You always get these particles blinking in and out of existence, and one of those might have suddenly expanded and become a whole universe. Well, then the question is, well, where did that quantum field come from? That's not nothing, that's something. And this is what some critics pointed out about Krauss. So I think another area where physics needs philosophy, or philosophy has certainly been helpful, is in interpreting theories. Like quantum mechanics is this incredibly powerful mathematical model of that explains why light and why electrons and protons and neutrons do what they do, why they behave in certain ways in experiments, but nobody knows what it means. It doesn't make any sense. And so you've got all these philosophers who are trying to explain it, but even more importantly, they're pointing out all the ways in which quantum mechanics on its face is incoherent and actually poses all these fundamental philosophical problems about the universe. So, and about the nature of reality. So, I take a lot of shots at philosophers too. I think philosophy makes a mistake when it thinks it's solving problems. Some philosophers actually think that they're going to come up with a solution to the meaning of quantum mechanics. Here it is. It's the pilot wave theory, or it's many worlds, or something like that. What I think philosophers are best at, even though this is not something they would necessarily agree with, is pointing out all the inadequacies of our knowledge, all the ways in which our theories, as powerful as they might be, don't really tell us what we want to know about how the world works. Yeah. So yeah, maybe I say this about philosophy because I consider myself a kind of amateur philosopher.
Yeah, I think I was guilty of the same thing as Lawrence, from coming into studying medicine, going through pretty much a phase of life where hard science was the only answer for me. And I thought that is the only way to gain truth. But after doing a philosophy degree, I realized how blindly ignorant I was. I'm not speaking for Lawrence, because this podcast isn't a platform for people to get into debates. It's more about understanding everyone's perspective, getting the ideas. But I did realize that I had fundamental flaws in assuming everything could be answered with science, or the scientific method as a body of knowledge used to gain truth. I mean, that postmodernist belief, I empathize with that too. It's very difficult, I feel, sometimes to gain access to the ultimate truth. And I think that probably opens the door to philosophers then going against science in many ways, where a scientist cannot really defend themselves. So if someone does claim, okay, well, we don't understand dark matter, Do you think that sort of puts them in a position now to then argue for anything is possible, the relativist argument?
That's the problem. And this is why I'm not a postmodernist, not a true postmodernist who thinks that everything is relative, that one story is as good as another, and that we never really settle any scientific questions once and for all. I just think that that is obviously untrue. There are lots of scientific questions that we have settled once and for all, like the one I mentioned earlier. What are those fuzzy patches in the sky? Are those clouds of gas here in the Milky Way, or are those other galaxies far beyond our own? We solved that. There are other galaxies out there. But in terms of, I became a science journalist because I thought in the 1980s, because I thought science is the most exciting human endeavor. It's the human endeavor that most makes progress. It gets somewhere. It's transformed our world intellectually and materially in just countless ways. And I also thought that science was our best hope of telling us what we are and explaining where the universe came from, solving all these profound mysteries that once religion tried to solve. The older I get, the more I realize how limited science is, and how much we need philosophy and the arts and mysticism, certain kinds of religion, especially if it's not dogmatic religion, to try to understand what the hell is going on. I just posted this morning a little column on The Golden Bowl, which is the last novel written by Henry James. It came out in 1904. It's one of James's most famously obscure, difficult works. Hardly anybody reads it because it's just nasty. It's interminable. But James thought it was his best book. So I thought, okay, I've got to read this thing. And I read it. I finished the damn thing. I don't recommend it to anybody else. But in the course of reading it, I think I figured out what James was up to. It's got a really simple plot. It's just four people. It's kind of a love quadrangle. Two of the characters are having an affair that can hurt the other two, to whom they're married. And it's like really simple, but then James just goes on and on about it. What he's trying to do is show that each of us has what cognitive scientists call a theory of mind, meaning a kind of model of other people. So you and I both have a little theory of mind for each other now, just because of this conversation we're having, and we're constantly updating it and changing. And it's based on very limited data, and we're constantly updating it as we talk to each other. You also have a theory of mind of other people around you that you're close to, that you love, and your theories of mind of those other people, those are also always changing. And when you have a theory of a mind of someone else, you also have to have an idea of what their theory of mind is for you. So James, I realized this is what James is up to. He's showing that you have just four characters, and there is this what could be called, what complexity theorists would call a combinatorial explosion of theories of mind, which are all sort of feeding back to each other in these endless loops. Theory of mind is one of the deepest questions in cognitive science and philosophy right now. And here is Henry James in this bizarre novel about a bunch of rich assholes. Who cares about them? But there's this theme at the bottom of it that is absolutely profound and applies to all of us. It's like a punch in the face that's telling us no one really knows what's going on in anybody else's head. All we do is guess.
Yes.
And that is something that supplements through this work of brilliant literature although brilliant, but really hard to read.
I'm looking at it now. So your tweets, to distract myself from everything, I just wrote a review on Henry James. So it's called
Yeah.
The Poll. Eh? So I'm looking at your Twitter bio. It says, "Know nothing, know it all. Science lover, science basher." I like that. It's a good way to sort of maintain that humility while performing this search for truth. Well, I know you don't like the postmodern version of that air quote.
Yeah, the know nothing, know it all. Because who the hell am I? I'm like passing judgment on string theory and interpretations of quantum mechanics and theories all across integrated information theory. And all I do is I sort of look into these things, I talk to people about them, and then I dare to have opinions on them. So that makes me a big know-it-all, and an arrogant bastard. And at the same time, as I told you, the older I get, the more I realize that I don't know anything. I feel appallingly ignorant and confused by reality. And I feel as though, and I've given up hope that I'll have some huge revelation that will suddenly make everything sensible to me. In fact, it's pretty consistently going the other way, and I've just tried to embrace it. So it might seem like a paradox, the know-it-all, know-nothing thing, but from where I am, it actually works really well.
Tell me, throughout the years when writing on these topics, particularly, let's get back to the mind-body problem, when you wrote about these topics, which philosophers and scientists do you think had the best sort of, the closest approach to the solution, let's say?
Yeah. In terms of, so there's when it comes to philosophers, see, I think of philosophy as being kind of a branch of literature, almost like a kind of really weird poetry, and that has various aesthetic effects. So I respond to the style of philosophers as well as to the substance of what they're actually saying. And one of my all-time favorite philosophers, and I've been fortunate enough to interview a lot of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, especially philosophers of science. And one of my favorites was this guy named Paul Feyerabend, was an Austrian philosopher. He was old enough to actually have served in the German army toward the tail end of World War II. He was shot in the back, so he was permanently crippled. He had difficulty walking, and he had trained in physics, and then decided to go into philosophy because he just loved arguing with people, and he turned into. He called himself a philosophical anarchist, meaning that he didn't believe in philosophical systems. He was kind of destructive. He liked to tear things down, and he had this style of doing it that was really flamboyant. He's kind of like a performance artist. So he's basically a philosopher who's saying that philosophy is impossible. And so he's like a walking contradiction, and he kind of embraced that. He savagely mocked other people, but he also savagely mocked himself, and he especially mocked the whole idea of understanding reality. I interviewed him in the 1990s at a period when a lot of people were still taking seriously the idea of a theory of everything. This is a term that Stephen Hawking helped to popularize. A theory of physics, but it could also be coming from other fields that would tell us why we're here, that could tell us why there's something rather than nothing. And Feyerabend, and I still kind of believe that when I talked to Feyerabend, and Feyerabend said to me, "Are you kidding me? A theory that's going to tell us what really is out there? We're nothing. Human beings are nothing. We're just like flies that are here for a second and then we're gone. We think, and we keep saying we found the truth about reality. Meanwhile, the truth is behind, is still out there laughing at us. So he had this really dramatic way of talking that I loved. And at the time when I interviewed him, I thought he goes too far. He was just denigrating science and the whole Western intellectual tradition so much, and even saying that we have to have more consideration for the beliefs of indigenous people and religious ideas of creation. And I didn't want to hear that. And as time goes on, I've become more sympathetic toward him, especially because I realized what he was telling me was that knowledge can become oppressive. Knowledge, when the scientists are saying this is what's happening and you must accept it because it's true. And Feyerabend was saying, and this was radical at the time, now it doesn't seem so radical. Feyerabend was saying, why do we have to accept it? Maybe we prefer to see the earth as being born out of some like primordial earth goddess. And if that gives us comfort, if that connects us to our ancestors, then who are the scientists to take that away from us? So he was showing that there's this kind of dichotomy between truth and freedom. Feyerabend believed in truth. People didn't understand that about him. He believed in truth, and that's one reason why he thought science was dangerous, because it actually does figure out the world, and it imposes its ideas on people. But he didn't necessarily, he thought that might lead to some kind of totalitarian system where people all have to believe the same thing. And I still have problems with that point of view, but I see what he is after, and more freedom of thought, which is what mattered to Feyerabend, also matters to me.
I'm definitely going to check him out. It sounds very intriguing. Have you noticed it seems that a lot of people online today, when they approach this topic of consciousness and the mind-body problem, it seems that there seems to be an increase of illusionist thinkers now. I think particularly within the last, let's say, 10 years. I think Dennett and them wrote a paper around 2016, Keith Frankish, they wrote on illusionism as a theory of consciousness. Something I noticed recently is that all of them seem to be quitting Twitter one by one. I think Dennett recently posted a tweet that he's leaving. Keith seems to be doing the same thing. What are your thoughts on illusionism as a theory of consciousness?
Yeah. All right. So I actually just reposted something related to illusionism. I'm an old acid head. Okay. I started taking LSD, psychedelics, when I was just a boy. I was like 15 or 16 years old. And that has altered my thinking, or it's something that always is there in the background when I'm thinking about questions like, what is reality really? What's the relation of mind and matter, and which is primary? Does matter come out of mind, or does mind come out of matter? What is it? I'm also really interested in mysticism, by which I mean these extraordinary experiences that people have had throughout history and still have, from all different cultures and traditions, that seem to point toward the existence of something beyond this, where we are right now. And different mystical traditions in different ways, Buddhism, Hinduism, and even Christianity, some of the Western religions, all suggest, they imply, or some state very explicitly, that this is an illusion. This is like a dream state. And the actual reality is something entirely different. So I had enough LSD that I take that idea very seriously. I've been I'd been tripping and suddenly thought, yeah, this is like a dream. And I've even felt like I sort of went beyond the veil and saw what was behind it. I wrote a whole book on this called Rational Mysticism, where I tried to make sense of some of these experiences that I'd had. The problem, and then there are modern scientific versions of illusionism. Donald Hoffman is one purveyor of this. I also have become sort of unlikely friends over the last few years with Deepak Chopra, who's kind of an illusionist. He's somebody who basically says that mind is the basis of everything and not matter. So I'm sympathetic toward these ideas, but at the same time, I'm really skeptical of them, and I even have a moral objection to them. In this world, there are bad things happening. There's suffering and oppression. I mean, like right now, there's suffering that is unimaginable. And what bothers me about illusionism, or even the idea that everything is consciousness, and this is true of multiverse theories too, they sort of get us to discount this world we're living in, where there are people in pain, like right now, and people who are being treated unfairly, who are being brutalized. And I don't, apart from whether illusionism is right or wrong, or whether idealism or panpsychism are right or wrong, there are the practical moral consequences of ideas like this. And I don't like any theory or worldview that gets us off the hook to an extent about doing something about the terrible things happening in this world that are not illusions, that are real. There's nothing more real than human pain. So I'm kind of, I've written about it a lot. Also, it bothers me that, so humans are sort of narcissists. We're all natural narcissists. Every person is the center of his or her cosmos, right? And we humans collectively think we're really great. We think we're better than all the other organisms on Earth. So from the beginning, we've always thought that all of existence was about us. It was created for us, for some kind of spiritual project that we're engaged in. And we started seriously questioning that about 500 years ago. And I see that as one of humanity's triumphs, is to overcome its innate narcissism and realize that, no, we're just like one little type of organism on a little speck of dust going around one little star in this unimaginably big universe. So we should get over ourselves. And now I see this trend, I call it neo-geocentrism. It's like a return of geocentrism. I see this as theories like integrated information theory and Donald Hoffman's theory, and all these theories that give primacy to consciousness as a return to a kind of geocentric thinking. So yeah, I guess is what I'm trying to say is I'm ambivalent about all that stuff.
You're touching on something very important, because this podcast, I mean, it touches on the nature of consciousness, reality, free will, and morality. So you're on that morality spectrum at the moment. What are your thoughts on free will? What role does that?
Yeah. I've really gone back and forth. I think free will is a philosophical rather than scientific question. And by that, I mean that I don't think free will is solvable. I don't think there will ever be a slam dunk argument that proves, yes, free will exists. No, it does not exist. I can trace my own life back to, through my parents, all the way back to the beginning of life on Earth, and back to the beginning of the universe. I didn't ask for any of that to happen. How free can I be? Where was the choice in my life? At the same time, I am aware of myself as this creature who can look into the future and discern different trajectories I could take from this point where I am now. I know I have choices. I make them all the time. So therefore, of course, I have free will. Um, so I can see it in both these two ways. I call myself a free will believer because I think it's really important for us not to feel as though we're victims of forces beyond our control, in part so we can take care of these problems that I was describing that lead to human suffering, all the various forms of injustice and oppression that cause people to have horrible, painful lives. We need to think we can do something about sexism and racism and war, inequality. And to the extent we think we believe the determinists, I think we're less likely even to try to really change things. That's what worries me.
As you said, I mean, it's deeply entwined with the mind-body problem as well. These questions are fundamentally going to affect how we approach moral responsibility, how we engage with people, what we do. So it's important that if we do sort of come up with any sort of theory, that we remember that this does have practical implications.
Absolutely. So I have somewhere here, I haven't read it yet, but I have the new book by Robert Sapolsky, the Stanford biologist. And let me see, where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. I've got to read this soon because he agreed to have a conversation with me about the book by Zoom in just a few weeks. And so in this book, he argues against free will.
Yes, he does.
Okay, so you've read it.
I haven't, but I've spoken to quite a few people who've read it already, and I've had on the show, and they said he makes quite a strong case for it as well. And I think Greg Caruso as well, who he quotes a lot of Greg and Dirk Pierboom's work in it on rejecting retributivism, and it's about hard incompatibilism.
Yeah, so I really like Sapolsky. As I've met him a couple of times. I've read several of his books. I'm a huge fan. And so I wrote a book called The End of War, which argues for free will and choice, and that we can overcome war. We shouldn't think of it as something that is imposed on us by our nature, by circumstance. And I cited Sapolsky's work, which I thought supported that. And so to know that he's written a book against free will now, it upsets me. So I'm sort of bracing myself to read it. Maybe there's a way of looking at free will, because he's a very humane, kind, compassionate person. Maybe there's a way to look at free will that's consistent with a program of social justice and progressive values. Yeah. I assume that he makes that case in his book, but I'm at this point, I'm skeptical, but we're going to talk about it in a few weeks.
No, John, I can completely agree with that, because when I think of Robert Sapolsky, I almost never expected him to write a book where he would defend determinism. It was something that I also it took me by surprise as well. But when I saw Greg Caruso talk about the fact that he's quoted him a couple of times at Dirk Pierboom, I realized how he's going to approach it, because they make very good cases for social justice within an illusionist framework of free will. So I think you're going to find it quite fascinating when you read it, and I think you might enjoy it.
Yeah, I've got some Buddhist friends. I once interviewed at great length a British psychologist named Susan Blackmore. Yes. Have you heard of her?
Yes, I have as well.
Yeah, she's really an interesting person, a really lively mind. And I don't think she likes being called a Zen Buddhist, but she practices Zen Buddhism. She practices mindfulness. She meditates a lot. And she was an adamant denier of free will. And she tried to convince me that to give up free will means kind of being liberated. She saw it as a kind of enlightenment, and where you're totally living in the moment, and you realize that you really have no control of your life. You don't have any true choices, so just go along with things. And she said all this very eloquently. I never bought it. I just can't. It's just one of those. I never understood it. Seeing the lack of free will as liberating, although sometimes I find my own choices oppressive. If I'm trying to decide between doing two things, one of which might be the right thing to do, but it's very difficult. Another is easier, but not such the right thing to do. That can be hard, and freedom is hard. It can be. I can see how you might think it's liberating to live in a totalitarian or fundamentalist religious state that tells you exactly what to think and do all the time. Okay, sure, fine. But I don't want to live there. I'd rather have these choices, even if they're illusory. So I sometimes say I don't believe in God, at least not any kind of God that I've encountered yet. But I do believe in free will, or I have faith in free will. That's like a crucial part of my worldview.
It's interesting because, I mean, while Sapolsky does a complete, technically like a 180 from what you'd expect him to believe, someone who does that for me as well is Daniel Dennett, because I would assume Dennett would be a free will illusionist, but some reason he's not, and I'm always surprised by that.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Freedom Evolves.
Yes.
That I thought was really profound. Dennett annoys me often just because he's such a smarty pants. He's so smug. He's a brilliant writer, but he's always so pleased with himself. And he's always so sure that he's right about absolutely everything. And he's got this idea that consciousness is an illusion, which he's criticized for that in some ways that are unfair, but in other ways that I think are absolutely justified. So you're right. I would have expected him to be a hardcore determinist because he's a hardcore materialist, but he talks about free will as being a kind of invention like money or marriage. So it's not part of the nature of reality, but it's an invention that has proved to be extremely useful and meaningful. And once, like money, once it's there, it is real. Once you start believing in free will, you start believing that you have all these choices, then you can't deny it. It's there. It's part of our lives. And what I like about Dennett made me realize that free will is not something that is just on the level of individuals. It's political as well. So I think you can even look at different societies, judge them, rank them according to how much free will citizens have, which means how many choices they have. There's some societies in which people have very few choices. And especially if you go back in history, most people had very few choices in how to live their lives. But nowadays, lots of people, I'm assuming you and I are part of this category, there are all sorts of crazy things we can do with our lives. And that is one of the great triumphs of human evolution and the evolution of culture, to give us more and more choices, to give us more and more free will. And so that's another reason why I don't like denying free will, because it seems to me that you're denying this really amazing fundamental part of human progress.
Have you seen Dennett wrote a new book called I've Been Thinking? I think it's called I've Been Thinking. It's a memoir.
Yeah. I started reading it because I get people send me galleys. They keep hoping I'm going to write something positive about these books, even though evidence suggests otherwise. And I got it, and this is probably unfair. It just it was so self-congratulatory from the start that it kind of turned me off, so I set it aside. I should probably try it again. Have you read it?
No, not yet, but I have seen similar reviews online. I saw someone defend Dennett by saying, I mean, if you're a philosopher, your job is to actually talk, to counter argue and talk to people and have that sort of smugness. You need to almost have that confidence. So I saw a lot of people defending him as well, saying, look, you should actually be this confident when you're trying to make such profound counter arguments to things. But I mean, it seems to be everyone is commenting on that.
And for a philosopher, he's really a good writer. He constantly is coining all these phrases. And by the way, if we're talking about Dennett, I want to I'd like to mention this famous idea that he's had, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, and he's been really criticized for it. People sometimes say that he claims consciousness is an illusion, and that means consciousness doesn't exist. And how could such a smart person have such a stupid idea, is what a lot of people have said. And so he went on and on about this idea in his book.
Consciousness Explained.
Yes, but in a more recent book, From Bacteria to Bach.
Exactly.
And so I finally realized what he meant by this idea that consciousness is an illusion in that book. He had this wonderful phrase, competence without comprehension. And he's just making the point that much of what we do that gets us through a typical day involves unconscious information processing. We're sort of like zombies. We're like automatons performing various chores. Dennett might say, even this conversation that you and I are having right now, we've got these programs kind of stored up and we're sort of switching them on and off. I don't buy that, but I understand what he means. And the more I've thought about it, the more I have to recognize this disturbing truth that I am kind of like an automaton, and I am kind of like a zombie. And I think most humans are. So Dennett isn't saying that consciousness doesn't exist. He's basically saying it's just not very important. It's so unimportant that it might as well not exist. Yeah. I think that's his point. And I've done a lot of reflection on this, in part because I just wrote this book about quantum mechanics. And a lot of physicists, as you probably know, they learn quantum mechanics and they're told to shut up and calculate. They're told not to think about what quantum mechanics means. So in other words, they're taught in a way that promotes competence over comprehension. And trying to learn quantum mechanics and learning all the math and doing all these math exercises just made me aware of myself as this gigantic collection of algorithms that are all constantly chugging along and propelling me through life, and I don't really understand any of them. So I give Dennett more credit for that now than I used to, and in fact it's a very disturbing but profound insight into the human condition. And by the way, it's kind of the same thing that Henry James was saying in The Golden Bowl. Nobody really knows anything.
Yeah, no, it's Dennett's a very good writer. I mean, when I wrote my own dissertation, I actually helped defend some of his views because he made such an impact on me. And I wrote on illusionism as a theory of consciousness. And I mean, to quote him, consciousness is an illusion of the brain, for the brain, by the brain. There is no central homunculus. He's just trying to say that phenomenal essence-like ethereal entity that we all think so mystical is just not there. There's no such thing as that. It's a misinterpretation because of our algorithms telling us that something is sort of there. And it takes us out of that pedestal that you were talking about earlier. He's basically trying to tell us that we're not as important as we think. We pretty much like to believe we are, but there is no sort of on switch that kind of just switches this whole zombie on. But basically, we are on that autopilot state most of the time.
Yeah, and this whole idea that we're zombies or automatons, I think it's a really important point to make and to accept, because it gets us to try to oppose it, to counter it. So I've become aware of, I think Dennett, one of the implications of his writing, or maybe he's even spelled this out, is that we're machines that are designed to do various things, mainly to live long enough to reproduce and send our offspring off into the next generation without us. That's our basic purpose here. Then we can accomplish various other things that are kind of related to that. And we don't really need a lot of consciousness. And our brains are designed to detect novelty and to sort of overlook things that aren't necessary for adjusting our worldview and trying to solve problems in a different way. So as a result, we're constantly being habituated to life. We take it for granted, and we don't really see anything. And this is how I see myself. I'm constantly sort of trying to remind myself, just wake up, quit sleepwalking through this day. Just stop and look around you and notice things for a change. And it seems to me that we haven't really talked that much about spirituality in this conversation yet. But for me, spirituality just means waking up and overcoming your habituation, stepping outside of your zombie robot self and saying, holy shit, look at this. Look at where we are. How infinitely improbable this situation right here is. How infinitely improbable I am and you are, and this whole thing. And unfortunately, our brains are designed to get us to forget about that, the improbability of things. And so I'm grateful to Dennett for having pointed out this tendency that we have to become unconscious and to have just competence without comprehension and to become zombies, because it makes me think, no, I don't want to be that way. I want to try to wake up at least for a couple of seconds every day.
Someone who adds to Dennett's work and Frankish's work on what you're talking about right now is actually Susan Blackmore. She writes on delusionism, and she asks this. She forces the reader to ask this question: am I conscious now? Because we'd never walk through life really asking that question, and that's why it's a delusion. It's almost a delusional thought to assume you're conscious when you walk through most of your life, not even asking that question. What? Because not many people ask that question. Am I conscious right now? Like, what? Am I really in this moment? Am I present, completely aware? It's most people have to train a skill to do that. You have to meditate for years. You have to go through sort of a trip, some sort of an experience. Because for the most part, most people are actually in that state. The autopilot.
Yeah, so I'm again, because I'm an old hippie. I'm really interested in the whole spirituality scene and the possibility of enlightenment and gurus and all that nonsense. And there's so much bullshit in the realm of spirituality and what I call the enlightenment racket. But there's something at the core of it that's real. I think a lot of spirituality is aimed at just making people happy and at overcoming bad habits of thought or just bad habits, period. And I see it in some cases as a form of brainwashing. Just don't have those negative thoughts, just be happy, that kind of thing. I'm actually not interested in spirituality as a route to happiness. I'm fortunate. I'm like more or less a pretty happy person. I'm prone to anxiety. I have been depressed in my life, but I'm okay. I think I got good genes. So I'm more interested in spirituality and mysticism as a route to truth. And that means being conscious, that means waking up. And then, what is the truth? What are you supposed to see when you're conscious, when you stop and wake up? And for me, and I've talked about this with a lot of people who claim to be enlightened, and some of them agree with this, but many of them don't. Many of them see enlightenment as a kind of like state of terminal chilling out. You're just like, yeah, man, everything is copacetic. That's fine. I see it more as what I was talking about before, recognizing that the odds that we exist at all are infinite. If we see things accurately, and I think science points to this too, physics and complexity theory, and even attempts to understand the origin of life, all point to our existence here, the existence of humanity, let alone each of us as individuals, as infinitely improbable. And therefore, when you see things that way, you're not saying, well, yeah, they're infinitely improbable because there was a fluctuation in the primordial void and that it led to inflation. But it's not, you're not seeing how things are, you're just seeing that things are. So actually, Wittgenstein, who's also, a philosopher, has had an effect on me, but I read him as a poet. And his book Tractatus, which is just like a crazy prose poem, he's got a phrase at the end that says, this is translated from the German, the gist of it is, not how the world is the mystical, but that it is.
Very nice.
So you're not looking at the world and saying, oh yeah, the world is here because it was created by God. Oh, isn't that far out? You're just seeing the stark fact of existence, and it blows you away, and you realize the total inadequacy of any theory or theology, of any language or explanation for doing it justice. You just are overwhelmed by it. And to me, that is what enlightenment would be, being like that all the time. The problem is, if you're going like, oh, fuck, oh my God, I can't believe I'm alive. You still gotta, I gotta go teach a bunch of freshmen tomorrow. I gotta pay my bills. I have to hang out with my girlfriend, and she doesn't want me to be totally nuts and babbling about the mystery of existence all the time. So you still gotta live your life.
Yeah.
But I try to have some of those moments as often as I can.
It's about trying to find that balance of not merely staying alive, but living.
Yes. And some people pull it off better than others. I mean, you can go and live in a cave in the woods, but I don't want to do that. I like the practical aspects of life too. I like being a good teacher. I like writing, talking to people like you, and I like having friends. I like having a girlfriend. I've got 2 kids that I love. All that stuff. It keeps me rooted in the world, and that's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely beautiful, and it's a great way to sort of round this conversation up. John, what do you think from your years of experience and as a very well-known science writer? How else do you believe we should pursue truth, and how should we approach science moving forward?
Oh, wow. I think it's doing okay. One of the problems with science right now that a lot of people are commenting on is the careerism, the ambition, the constant pressure to publish and to publicize your results is leading to a lot of crappy science, and including, I mean, if it's string theory, who cares? But it's leading to crappy science in areas that matter, in biomedicine. Drugs for cancer are being promoted that actually aren't very effective or might even be harmful. Same with drugs for mental illness. I still think science is this incredible cultural invention. And I'm so happy to be kind of along for the ride, watching what the scientists do and watching new ideas emerge related to consciousness or the origin of the universe or whatever. I don't really have any big ideas for reform except just to tell people, and it's hard if you're out there, you're ambitious, you're trying to get a name for yourself. But I think scientists just need to be a little more modest and humble in their claims, and to recognize that there are, and this is weird coming from a guy who wrote a book called The End of Science, but to realize that they're part of an infinite conversation that's going to keep going forever, and not to make the claim that they've got final answers ever, because there are no final answers.
I know, John, thank you so much. Any final words from your side? It's been such a pleasure, man. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, as I said, this is the best part of the job for me, is talking about this stuff with somebody else who cares about these issues as well. So it's been an enormous pleasure for me.